we'll start with this. Unified super featherweight champion Michaela Mayer posted this via social media, and it reads, "This is my last year at 130 pounds. It's time for me to move up. Taking a fight in April while I wait for Choi versus Baumgartner. When I outbox the shit out of Baumgartner for undisputed, I would love to defend against Persoon, but only if we get the ball rolling. This is all doable in 1 year." And, in light of everything we talked about in my previous video, Bob Arum's comments in reference to the sport of women's boxing.
So Michaela wants to move up to lightweight at year's end.
You have to wonder what the future holds for Michaela Mayer. Alicia Baumgartner, reigning WBC super featherweight champion, Alicia Baumgartner's reaction to this news.
She says it's excuses.
She says, the excuses. See you at 135. You're going to get these hands regardless.
So is it possible Michaela Mayer is on the verge of outgrowing super featherweight?
It's entirely possible because Michaela Mayer,
I believe it,
unbeknownst to most, debuted as a lightweight, 135-pound fighter.
The first 6 pro fights were fought just above super featherweight.
That's right. Unbeknownst to most, Michaela's first 6 fights as a professional boxer were fought at lightweight.
Within the lightweight limit, I should say.
Not at a full 135 pounds, but just above 130 pounds, which is super featherweight. After 6 fights, she eventually moved down to super featherweight, and she's been there ever since. At 31 years old, I can believe that Michaela Mayer has outgrown the super featherweight division, or is in the process of outgrowing it. She's saying this is going to be her last year there. You have to wonder...
She's a unified champion now.
I don't think it's at all far-fetched to say that as a unified champion moving forward, Michaela's going to want to make more money. I think we all want to make more money. Better still, I think that applies to Michaela, though if Michaela's future lies at lightweight, you have to wonder if Top Rank is the best place for her.
Especially with Bob Arum shooting off at the mouth the way he's shooting off at the mouth.
Which is funny because just last night there was a female bout featured on Top Rank's card, the Kalia Karuni versus Carla Torres fight. I figured that Top Rank might be grooming the winner of this fight to potentially take on Michaela Mayer in the spring in what would be a keep busy fight.
While she waits for Alicia Baumgartner to unify titles on the matchroom side of things.
Carla Torres having effectively outclassed Kalia Karuni, emerging as the winner of the fight. I expect to see Mayer versus Torres in the spring. I expect to see Mayer versus Torres in the mean in between time, though beyond that fight, beyond 2022, you have to wonder if Top Rank really is the best place for Michaela moving forward, especially if she plans on campaigning as a lightweight. We all know that from 130 to 140 pounds, most of those belts within that weight class, they're all over there at Matchroom.
Katie Taylor still is that division's undisputed champion.
Hypothetically speaking, if she were to beat Amanda Serrano in late April, retain those alphabet titles, I don't get the sense there would be a rematch. Not if the fight is a decisive fight, a decisive victory for Katie, not if she hangs on to all of those alphabet titles. And a big fight for Katie, beyond that Serrano fight, if she were to win it, could be a Michaela Mayer showdown. Michaela says she's going to lightweight. That's the woman to beat at lightweight, if she beats Amanda. If Amanda beats her, well, that puts the shoe on the other foot, doesn't it?
Well, if Amanda were to beat Katie, I'd expect to see a second fight. I'd expect to see a rematch.
Those are just some things to think about this year. Given Bob Arum's recent comments in reference to the sport of women's boxing, should Michaela Mayer even stay at Top Rank? Is Top Rank even going to give her that option? And even if they do, is Top Rank the best place for a fighter that plans on campaigning as a lightweight beyond this year? Legitimate questions that need answers. In bantamweight news, a story that has my attention ahead of what is to be her upcoming IBF title fight against reigning IBF champion Maria Roman. Ebony Bridges has enlisted the aid of Mark Tibbs. That's right, Mark Tibbs. It's the same Mark Tibbs that trained Dillian White. That's the same Mark Tibbs that trained Billy Joe Saunders. He's now training Ebony Bridges. And it's good to have an experienced guy like Mark Tibbs in her corner because she's a lot less experienced than her opponent, Maria Cecilia Roman. Ebony's going to need everything to come together for this fight because Ebony's only been 10 rounds once in her very young pro career.
This should not be interpreted as a world title fight of opportunity.
And it's not even a foregone conclusion that Ebony Bridges wins this thing. It's got to all come together the night of the fight. This is very different from what we saw in Courtney versus Bridges because neither Shannon Courtney or Ebony Bridges was a reigning champion. They both had about the same experience level as professionals, and the title that was on the line was a vacant title. This is different. You're trying to pry away a belt from a reigning champion that's a lot more experienced than you are.
She ain't gonna give up that belt without a fight.
Could be rough seas for Ebony Bridges. Even if she pulls this thing off, even if she wins, it's going to take some doing. She's going to have to work for that W, work for that victory. She's coming off that injury to what I believe was her right hand.
A lot of people were very critical that Ebony even got to fight for a title against Shannon Courtenay.
Yeah, I saw a lot of wet blankets moaning about it online, but the title was vacant and somebody had to fight for it, so those two did. And Shannon Courtenay got the title. A lot has happened since then. Better still, this is a different situation because if Ebony Bridges can pull this off and pry that blue belt away from Maria Roman, you've got to give her the credit.
She will have beaten a champion to be a champion.
Which is the best way to do it, trial by fire. She may have caught Maria Roman at the most opportune time to catch Maria Roman, but Maria maintains
Maria's still got an edge because she's a lot more experienced.
that's going to be a good fight. Look for that on the undercard of Warrington versus Martinez, too. In other news, this past weekend, reigning WBC Cruiserweight champion Lunga Makabu of the Democratic Republic of the Congo successfully defended his green belt, his WBC title, by being awarded a rather dubious decision against Tibiso Muchunu. We fought for a second time, except this time Lunga's a champion, and most people agree Lunga didn't deserve that decision, but Lunga being the house fighter, this being the sport of boxing,
is anybody really surprised?
so much on the line for the house fighter, not just his WBC title, not just his green belt, but a potential Canelo Alvarez showdown. A showdown that I'm not even convinced is going to happen, though there are still opportunities out there for Lunga. Canelo or no Canelo. Given that Canelo's been made two offers, one by Matchroom, DAZN, and another by the PBC, I really don't get the sense that he's going to go up to cruiserweight and challenge Lunga for his WBC title. A lot of people feel, based on Lunga being given this gift, he's really not the challenge that people made him out to be. And to those guys, need I remind you that Tibiso Muchunu is a cruiserweight after all. I mean, you do realize that even if Lunga was given a gift, even if he was given a decision that he didn't deserve, that was against a cruiserweight, not a super middleweight moving up in weight.
Before you go preaching to me about the gift that Lunga got, what about the gift Jamal Charlo got against Matvey Korobov?
Oh, I'm not arguing with any of you out there that Lunga Makabu might have done enough, just enough. I'm saying that even if Lunga got a gift, so did Jamal. What's your point?
I still view Jamal Charlo as a lighter touch.
And if I'm being honest, I think Jamal Charlo might actually be more likely to get the Canelo Alvarez fight next than Lunga Makabu, because when it comes to the Lunga Makabu fight, you have to ask yourself, if Canelo Alvarez were to move up in weight, challenge this guy for that green belt, who's going to finance the fight? Who's going to promote it? Don King?
You see that place?
It's like they were fighting in a shoebox or something. How do we know Don King doesn't make the situation difficult? And what kind of money would Don King be looking to get his fighter, his champion, Lunga Makabu? I mean, it's conceivable that Matchroom could promote the show if Canelo Alvarez pitches the show to them. The PBC could do the same. Maybe they do the show.
Don King could exploit the situation and make things difficult.
My instincts, my gut tells me I shouldn't expect to see Canelo Alvarez versus Lunga Makabu next, though you never really know until you know.
What if he doesn't get the Canelo Alvarez fight next?
The saving grace for Lunga Makabu is that there are other sizable fights, perhaps not as sizable as a Canelo Alvarez fight, a Canelo Alvarez payday, but there are other fights out there for him. Lawrence Okolie is in the market for a unification match beyond this CS Slack fight he's about to have. A good fight, if I do say so myself, a good opponent choice, by the way. And if he makes his way past that guy, I'm pretty sure Lawrence is going to want to unify with somebody. Now, Maris Breedis, this division's man to beat, he's too busy cutting records to land himself a Jake Paul fight. He seems to be dedicating more of his time and more of his attention to try to get Jake's attention.
Fucking ridiculous.
I'm just saying, if things don't materialize between Canelo and Lunga Makabu,
If they don't,
Lunga versus Okolie is an option, though. The potential for Don King to make things difficult in that situation, that separate situation, is the same as the Canelo situation. What kind of money is Don King going to want to put his guy in there against Lawrence Okolie on a Matchroom show?
he could fuck that fight up.
This still is the winner of the upcoming Arsen Goulamarian versus Igorov fight. WBA Cruiserweight champion Arsen Goulamarian. He's supposed to be defending his title against that guy, and if he makes it through that fight, or if Igorov beats him, Lawrence can look to unify with that champion, whoever that champion ends up being.
You know, we might not see an undisputed cruiserweight champion for a while.
In all seriousness, we might not. Things are a little bit more political than they have been at cruiserweight the last couple of years. I see the potential for Don King to make things difficult for just about anybody that wants to take that green belt away from his one champion, the one champion he has in his stable.
Yeah, he could fuck up a lot of fights for Lunga.
I hope that he doesn't. I hope we get to see Lunga Makabu in unification matches. But in this sport, you never know. In other news, per tweet from Adam Catterall, Richard Schaefer, Pro Bellum president Richard Schaefer, says that he expects to announce Naoya Inoue versus Nonito Donaire 2 within the next 2 weeks. He is also working on rescheduling John Riel Casimero versus Paul Butler, world title fight, and wants to do it in the UK, in the United Kingdom. It seems to me that the boxing gods and the cosmos, the universe as it were, it wants Nonito and it wants Naoya to run it back. These two guys, after it's been well over a year since they first met, since they first fought.
That was more than 2 years ago in late 2019, in November.
Naoya Inoue has defended his titles at least 3 times since then. Nonito Donaire, he's fought 2 times. One was that fight against Nordine Bali, the unbeaten reigning WBC bantamweight champion Nordine Bali, and then it was his first defense of that WBC title against Raymart Gaballo.
You know, I think Nonito still got it in him to beat the fuck out of a lot of guys.
I think he does, but in a rematch with Naoya Inoue, I have to tell you, I think Naoya's going to finish the job this time. I don't think this one's going to go to the cards. I think this time Naoya Inoue is going to stop him. When it comes to that John Riel Casimero fight, you know, he's still on the hook with Paul Butler, his WBO mandatory challenger. At this time, I don't know what John Riel Casimero's situation is, his management situation, his promotional situation.
After that stinker against Guillermo Rigondeaux, you see he's not fighting on Showtime.
I don't know if he's still with Sean Gibbons at this time, if I'm being honest. I don't know if Sean Gibbons is still helping to manage and handle John Riel Casimero's career, though I get the sense that because John Riel Casimero's next fight is supposed to be a Pro Bellum promotion, a Pro Bellum card, not a Showtime card,
a PBC card,
the WBO made things very clear that if John Riel Casimero pulls out of this fight due to sickness, due to injury, whatever happens, that brown belt's gonna go vacant. He's not gonna get to pull the same thing twice.
Real missed opportunity for John Riel Casimero.
Remember, before COVID shut everything down, him and Naoya Inoue was supposed to fight, and I'd wager that he would have made a decent amount of money had the fight come off, and instead of revisiting that fight and doing what they had to do to see the situation through and ensure that the unification match happens, they took John Riel Casimero over to the PBC.
He had like 2 fights there or something like that?
The last one was that stinker with Guillermo Rigondeaux, and now he's in a tough spot. He's between a rock and a hard place is what he is. They have rescheduled the Paul Butler fight. It's supposed to be going down April 23rd, the Olympia over there in Liverpool in the United Kingdom. And there's a sense of impending doom. I mean, what if Paul Butler beats this guy? And even if he don't, where does John Riel Casimero go from this?
If he wins the fight, where does he go from here? Back to the PBC?
Assuming Showtime would even have him, assuming they let him fight on that platform again after that stinker, who the hell's he gonna fight there?
Yeah, the only other 2 champions at this weight are about to fight each other again.
Finally, former WBO heavyweight champion Joseph Parker has said his team have reached out to Andy Ruiz Jr.'s team to try and make a rematch between them next. And if there were a rematch between these two guys, where would it take place? On the Matchroom side of things? On the PBC side of things? Who's going to finance this fight? And what do these guys want to make for it? I get the sense the Parker people are looking at Andy Ruiz because, well, he is a bigger name than Filip Hrgovic,
who he bypassed.
Had the opportunity to fight that guy for a Mando spot with the IBF, and he turned it down. He seems to want to fight Andy because, well, Andy is a bigger name. Maybe they figure they can get more money fighting Andy Ruiz Jr. Maybe that's what they think, though I'll tell you, if you tried to do that thing as a
pay-per-view,
domestic pay-per-view here in America, the numbers for it.
Nobody's busting at the seams around here to see Joseph Parker.
Or Andy Ruiz Jr., for that matter, who has fought only once, just once, since having lost those alphabet titles to Anthony Joshua in their rematch in a domestic pay-per-view here stateside that did next to nothing.
Well, look at who he was fighting. He was fighting Chris Arreola.
It wasn't the worst thing in the world that Andy Ruiz Jr. wanted a lighter touch to rebound off the loss to Anthony Joshua and break in a new trainer, Eddie Reynoso, who we all know trains Canelo Alvarez, Ryan Garcia, Oscar Valdez, star trainer, big name, all that jazz. It's not the worst thing in the world that Andy wanted a lighter touch for his rebound fight. What makes it such a travesty, such a blasphemy, is that they build it as a pay-per-view.
You want us to pay per view to see him tune up?
Commercially, in the United States, I don't think Parker versus Ruiz Jr. rematch does very well. I don't. Here in America, there's no demand for that fight. Here in America, Joseph Parker isn't a guy that a lot of people are climbing over each other to see, and neither is Andy, for that matter. Neither is Andy.
What are the Joseph Parker people expecting to pay for this thing?
I hope they don't think they're about to get an arm and a leg from the PBC, where Andy fights, Andy Ruiz Jr. being a PBC fighter. I hope they don't think that Al Heyman and the guys over there at the PBC are going to give him an arm and a leg to fight Andy in a rematch that nobody's asking for. I mean, they put no priority in the Crawford versus Spence welterweight showdown. So what makes the Parker people think the PBC are going to pay him an arm and a leg? Assuming that's what they're thinking. Or is it that they're hoping they can bring Andy over to Matchroom, over to the Zone, to do that fight there?
Well, either way, nobody's asking for that fight.
You put off fighting in an IBF final eliminator that could have saw you becoming the IBF's mandatory challenger, that could have got you a title shot at the winner of Joshua versus Usyk too, so you could chase around a guy that you beat already.
Quote unquote beat already.
Oh, I know, he made it out of that fight by the skin of his teeth. Better still, he made off like a bandit. He got the W. So what are you chasing that guy around again for? I don't understand it. I think the real reason, or at least a big part of it,
Andy looked like fucking shit in his last fight.
Think about it. What the hell am I gonna run risks with some unknown Croatian guy that might beat the fuck out of me for a title shot I probably won't get?
Well, because the Croatian guy's gonna beat the fuck out of you.
What am I gonna do that for when we got Andy Ruiz Jr. here? He's a bigger name, a more well-known guy than this Croatian guy, and more importantly, he's looked like shit. His last fight, that's how he looked, and he's not very active.
He got dropped by an over-the-hill Chris Arreola, so what would I do to him?
Got myself my new trainer, Andy Lee. I'm palling around with Tyson Fury, my buddy, who, Joseph Parker said he'd never fight that guy. He's like a brother to him. So he wants to run it back with Andy Ruiz Jr. And Andy looking quite vulnerable, I think, is a big part of the reason.
Yeah, that, and Andy's more well-known.
But I don't know if Smokin' Joe Parker actually gets that Andy Ruiz Jr. fight, because who's to say that Andy Ruiz Jr. ain't on standby for Deontay Wilder's
He hasn't retired.
his ring return? I don't know.